Since as early as the 1500s, the Mingus Mountains have been mined for silver and copper by the Apache and other Native American tribes. By 1883, the Jerome mining camp had been founded and a town began to flourish. The diverse hillside community consisted of Slavs, Mexicans, Irish, and Croatians. The community established a school, a variety of stores, and an excess of bars. In 1889, Jerome became an incorporated town, and by 1903, named the wickedest town of the West. At this time, no purpose-built theaters had been erected, but Nickelodeons offered entertainment to many miners and families.
The size of the theater dictated, or the building dictated what fire codes applied. So the Nickelodeons were set up in shoe stores. Literally, it would seat 50 people, and in the case of Warner Brothers' first theater, they had a little bit of a problem whenever they had a funeral, because they were getting the seats that the folding chairs they used from the mortuary across the street. So they couldn't do a show during a funeral for that reason, only because they couldn't get the seating.
This posed a problem until 1912, when the Coliseum Theater was constructed. Silent films, like Charlie Chaplin's A Night at the Show, appeared on screen. The establishment of theaters was more meaningful than just entertainment. Professor Hall further explains.
So this is way earlier, it's way before the First World War, which is interesting. And as one of the measures of success as the social structure of the state, which is only 2 years old, of course, in 1914, was the statistics cited for the number of theaters had gone up, because it was preferable for men to go to theaters rather than bars. And it was looked at as an upstanding activity versus going to a bar.
By 1917, the United States had entered World War I and copper was in high demand. That same year, the International Workers of the World Union supported a miners' strike in Jerome. With little success, the town of Jerome continued to grow. In 1918, multiple mine fires structurally destroyed Jerome. Open pit mining was introduced as an alternative method. Reinforced concrete was used to build the Liberty Theater, and it opened in 1919, the same year as the Lyric Theater. Both theaters were managed by partnerships between Phil and Joe Peckrich, along with George Harkins. They also managed various theaters and bars throughout the Verde Valley. By the 1920s, 4 theaters were operating in Jerome, including a Mexican theater called the Zaragoza. During the mid-1920s, the film West is West was primarily produced in Jerome and premiered at local theaters. Although the production starred Harry Carey, citizens of Jerome resented the film's storyline and portrayal of the town. They created their own film production in response called Yeast is Yeast. The film was a big hit, especially to those who were in it. The theaters were important in the community.
Then they did, of course, have more than just movie shows. They also had the YMCA would give a concert or whatever like that. So, and the Teachers Association and things like that. There would be community events.
Although pools and churches were segregated, theaters and schools were not. Shown in her 4th grade class photo, Priscilla Polk would go on to play the organ at the Liberty Theater.
The music sometimes was written specifically for the film, and I'm not sure exactly the year. I think it was in the 20s sometime.
The theater showed featured films, but differed from the movie palaces of the big cities.
In small towns, and the Liberty Theater is an example of a theater that's purpose-built as a theater, but it wasn't a movie palace, and none of the theaters around here really were built with that escapism in mind. Like Rothefeld, who's a famous impresario in New York City, said, "We sell theaters and not movies." And they pretty much sold movies, I think, here. It wasn't the theater experience. I'm certainly it was enjoyable. They had a pipe organ and all like that. But they didn't have an atmospheric show on the ceiling of clouds and cloud machines and sun and star moving by and all that stuff. And they didn't have a real elaborate lobby. In fact, they hardly had any lobby at all here at the Liberty. But it was a purpose-built building.
Theater improvements and other accommodations worked to create the big city atmosphere. In 1929, when Jerome was at its peak population of 15,000, and Arizona was the #1 copper-producing state in the U.S., the Great Depression struck. During the Depression, the Lyric Theater went broke and the bank acquired ownership. Phil Peckrich returned from California to purchase the theater from the bank and reopen the Lyric. The poor economics and technological advances claimed the life of the Liberty Theater when in 1930 it couldn't afford to install sound.
They did not sell you a sound system for your theater. They would lease you a sound system for your theater. And they would cheerfully collect it if you weren't paying your lease on a regular basis. And it cost up to $1,000 a week for movie palaces.
Among the economic crisis, the open pit mining method proved destructive to Jerome. Before the copper prices were considerably low, the mine constantly jeopardized the town's safety.
There's one story that I've heard that the Liberty Theater was actually struck by a piece of the Marion steam shovel when it blew up. This is, I don't know if it's a true story or not, but the Douglas Mansion State Park has part of the Marion steam shovel, and what happened is it hit an unexploded cache of dynamite.
In 1932, copper prices dropped to 5 cents per pound, and the United Verde mine closed temporarily. Then, in 1935, it reopened and resumed mining. That same year, the town jail was displaced 1 block downhill by a landslide caused by the mining shafts. The Lyric Theater was also damaged by the mining. Professor Hall further explains.
The Lyric Theater, which was the one that was destroyed by the Rapid Slide area on Main Street. Okay, the story that I heard was that people went to see the movie one day, and then the notorious alleged big blast that happened that caused everything to really shake shook the building, and the people went to leave, and the building had moved like 3 feet, and there was a gap between the building and the sidewalk.